Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the Xbox 360 and see how this specific device holds up in 2023. Now, this console came out many years ago, back in 2005, and it's crazy because this console still is kind of living through, I guess, through the Xbox Series S and Xbox, Series X. There is some backwards compatibility with 360 games, and it's insane because with a console like this, it was easily one of the, I guess, most iconic console designs that Microsoft has ever made. I remember the only other time I felt something like this with any other Microsoft console was probably the Xbox One S, and that original Xbox 360 was such a beautiful console, and it was one of the probably the only at-home consoles that I owned. I had a PlayStation 1 for a little bit of time. I played majority of my time any gaming, probably Game Boy Advance and Nintendo DS Lite. But then the Xbox 360 found our way to our home. It had the Red Ring of Death. There were some ways you can kind of go around it, and I was able to still play a few games on this console like Forza, Halo, some other ones too, but it was primarily those games. And I think this console, whenever I look at an Xbox 360, I immediately think back to 2008, 2009, 2010, and it's so insane how this console has aged because there are still so many things that this console has that the Xbox Series X and S also kind of bring. The first thing being the controller. I feel like the controller of the Xbox 360 was probably one of the best controllers ever. A lot of people agree with that. And what's funny is that controller still looks almost identical to that latest and greatest controller for the Series X and S. When I look at something like the PlayStation 3 controller, there is still a lot of overlap between that and the PlayStation 4 controller, but now if you look at the PS3 controller and the PS5 controller, they look completely different. Yes, there is some overlap, but they look pretty much completely different. When I look at the Nintendo Wii Pro controller, and I look at the Nintendo Wii U Pro controller, and even the one like the Nintendo Switch, there is a lot of differences for sure, so you have to kind of keep that in mind as well. With the 360, that wasn't really the case. This was a very good looking controller, and it was so good that Microsoft ended up keeping it for the next couple of controllers as well, which was honestly pretty cool. Now, on top of that, another thing to keep in mind with this console was that there were a few different revisions. So I think we all kind of know this now, but there was the Xbox 360, there was the Xbox 360 S, and then there was the Xbox 360e. So each individual console was a little bit of a different, revision of the previous one. And this was a really smart thing Microsoft did because they were able to kind of keep the momentum going. And so people think they're getting a newer console, and they were getting a better console, was revised, but they didn't have to wait years and years. They'd have to wait 6 years for the next iteration of console. They could just go and buy, the next iteration. And although it's not a brand new console, it's still a good upgrade. And I think that was something that was really smart that Microsoft did here. A lot of other companies were already doing it like this at that time as well. And Sony also dropped the PlayStation 3 Slim and the Super Slim. But the other thing that was funny and kind of interesting was that the 360, which, for Microsoft kind of paved the way for that, they did the same exact thing for the Xbox Ones. The Xbox One, One S, and then the One X all kind of brought the same lineup as the 360, 360S, and 360E, which makes us think that if, everything kind of looks the same, the Xbox Series X and S will also see kind of the same pattern as well. And that is another thing that may end up falling in place that kind of stemmed from the 360 that will be placed over to something like the Xbox Series X and S, which would also be beautiful. Now, with this type of console, there is still so much power behind it. With its iconic design, I remember there were so many people who would have this type of Xbox, and they would end up putting so many skins all over this specific device. It looked so beautiful, and I think that was a very interesting thing they did. They really did kind of make this console look so unique and look like its own. That way you didn't have to go ahead and kind of, feel out of place, from other manufacturers or other consoles, because this thing still had everything and all the power that you needed within it, which is honestly very beautiful. Now, on the design of this thing on the front, you did have that standard, CD slot. So you could always click on that CD slot and output that, disc tray. You can throw in, disc if you want to, which was pretty cool. You had 2 memory card slots on the left side, which was awesome. You had that standard power button on the center, which that in and of itself was a little kind of controversial, not for the power button itself, but basically what it kind of showcased and indicated, aka the Red Ring of Death. And then you had 2 USB ports on the front, which was also very cool. Having those USB ports on the front, which you can kind of add if you want to quickly put in a controller or something, it was right there for you, and I think that was another cool thing that Microsoft ended up giving us with the Xbox 360. Now on the top of this console, we did actually have our, storage expansion. Now there were some versions of the Xbox 360 that didn't have that type of capability, but with this one we did, and I think it was a very interesting thing that they did here by having us plug it into the top. I think it did actually look kind of cool, but I always had issues kind of bringing the storage thing up. And even now when I was filming this new video for all my 360s, I noticed that, wow, this thing does actually kind of it is kind of finicky here and there to actually take the storage out and put it back on. So that was another thing that's always been kind of weird. I don't know if anybody else can relate to that. And on the back, we had a few different ports. So we had our output, capability. We had our AC adapter. We had an Ethernet port as well, which was pretty cool. We didn't really have anything super crazy going on with this console. We pretty much had the same thing that we usually would have. And we also had another USB port on the back too, which was pretty cool in and of itself. So this console on the outside, I think still looks pretty cool. It still looks really awesome for the most part. And even that kind of stuff, I love seeing on this type of console because it just gives us so much capability even from this super old console. Is 2005 a super old console? Maybe not. Maybe some people consider like the NES super old. But now, I mean, in a few years, this console is going to be 20 years old. And that in and of itself is going to be a super crazy thing. Now, Wikipedia says that the lifespan of the Xbox 360 was from 2005 to 2016. And if that ends up being even remotely true, that was a super long lifespan. There were tons of games that came out, even like in 2013, 2014, that were still coming out for this console. Like I know GTA 5 came out for this console, and that came out, that wasn't even probably one of the last games that came out. But even a lot of people at that moment were like, wow, I cannot believe, GTA 5 came out for this console. But there were so many games. I mean, you had the other Grand Theft Auto, you had Devil May Cry, you had another Taken, you had a Final Fantasy that came out for this thing, you had all those Forzas that came out. There were tons of games all over the place, and because of the power behind the Xbox 360, Microsoft was able to go ahead and pretty much fund this thing because they were selling quite well. It may have not been the best selling console of all time, but this thing I think kept Xbox kind of in the room in the conversation for the best and one of the better selling consoles. And then having that type of like Xbox versus PlayStation race, it really left us in a really good spot where these two manufacturers were at, trying to outpace one another of giving us the best console during that time. And I think now it doesn't really seem like that's the case anymore. It feels like people who have PlayStation and Xboxes may have both consoles, but there doesn't seem like there's a lot of competition anymore. And then you had the Nintendo Wii on the side as well that was just picking up sales from everybody. So I think looking back, the Xbox 360 brought a lot to the table, and I think in and of itself was a super important console. Was it perfect? No, there were some shortcomings. There was the red ring of death and some other issues, and that was a big issue that directly affected a lot of people, including myself, which I was surprised at. I wasn't even that big of a gamer, and I was also affected by it, which is insane. But I think the situation the Xbox 360 is in now is that there is still a little bit of an Xbox 360 in every Xbox console since the release of this console. It seems like Microsoft really took what the 360 brought and kind of brought, either the controller layout or the system itself, or maybe even like the way the layout was, the Xbox layout, like the three different consoles, bringing them over to several other generations. And I think that's a really cool thing. If you look at the original Xbox, it's hard for me to kind of see what that Xbox brought and seeing where it's still kind of in play. But with the 360, which was its direct successor, I can definitely see how some of the Xbox 360 components are brought over to the latest console. So I definitely love to hear what your thoughts are of this specific, 360. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section as well. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.